Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy. Before we get to the episode, I have a very special announcement for you. The Painful Sex course for Catholic women is open for enrollment starting now. Enrollment is only open until August 5th, so join today. If you experience any kind of pain with sex, this course is for you. We take a two-pronged approach that no other painful sex program takes. We focus on both mindset and your pelvic floor. This program also includes live group coaching and live workouts. Click the link in the show notes or go to vinesinfullbloom.com/painfulsex. How do we know when it's time to stop trying to avoid and move into trying to conceive? I feel like this question has been the number one question in my Instagram inbox for the past month or so. So here it is, an awesome conversation about how to know when it's right to make that change. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I am a Catholic speaker and coach who's on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. And joining me today is my amazing, semi-regular co-host, Kathleen Chavanis.
All right. When to know
Hello.
when it's time to stop trying to avoid. Wording that sentence was hard.
Yeah.
When to know when it's time to stop trying to avoid. Or alternatively, when to know when it's time to start trying to conceive. But I didn't want to word it that way because I think there's a big difference between stopping trying to avoid and starting trying to conceive, because stopping trying to avoid might just mean, well, I'm going to throw the charts out the window and just not really know what my basic fertility status is. We'll just see what happens. Or stopping trying to avoid might be, well, we're just going to lax it out on the rules and just, you know, instead of being really hard and fast in the first phase and just, you know, right at 6 days, starting to abstain, or, you know, just immediately upon seeing a tiny bit of mucus, starting to abstain, like maybe just lengthening that out a little bit, right? Yeah. Or
I was going to say, or lengthening it out entirely and just being like, you know what? I mean, because I think the fact of the matter is you can stop charting, but once you know your cervical mucus pattern, like, you know where you are in your fertility. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, there's no question. I mean, I could just like not touch a chart ever again, and I'm always going to know whether I'm likely fertile or not.
You know what? That's basically charting with the old school 2-day method. Like, because the 2-day method doesn't actually really, like, you don't actually keep a chart. You basically just see mucus.
It was
and
mucus
then
today or yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it was today or yesterday, then it's a no-go. But if it was like not today and not yesterday, then you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or less. Don't follow that if you're like actively really trying to avoid pregnancy. Please have a instructor.
Although it had like a surprisingly high efficacy rate, the 2-day method.
Well, and it's been tested in like, you know, developing countries because you don't need technology with it. You don't need to have like a paper and pen or like a chart or anything. It's truly like you just kind of ask yourself a couple of questions each day. Yeah. And it's pretty simple. But anyway, this is not an episode about the 2-day method.
No, it's not. It's not. But, you know, what I was going to say is that it could just be a matter of like, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter where I am. Like, we're just going to go with the flow. If we just want to have sex, we're just going to have sex. It doesn't matter whether I'm seeing mucus or, you know, it could just be throwing the rules out the window altogether. Just see you later.
I think just from my own, you know, personal opinion, I think that's just a really beautiful place for couples to be.
Yeah.
It's just like, we're just going to love each other. And this episode, again, it's aptly titled. So I think people who aren't necessarily in this situation won't listen to this episode. But, you know, we're going to be talking about situations that are not needing to actively try to avoid pregnancy, right? So yeah, we're not in this episode, we're not talking about people who have a very strong medical reason to avoid pregnancy or just like a very serious reason to avoid pregnancy. We're talking about the like 95% of the rest of the population here.
Yeah.
So just know that like, that's just the disclaimer to start this episode.
Yeah.
But I think that just good. Like general sort of openness and like freedom is a beautiful place for couples to be. And we don't celebrate that enough. We don't value it enough, I think, sometimes because we're so like focused on, okay, let's make sure that couples know NFP, which is really important. Let's make sure they understand the rules, right? And we know that fertility awareness is highly effective if you follow those rules for avoiding pregnancy. We know those things. And our church often, like the people who are talking about NFP are NFP instructors. I mean, Kathleen and I are both NFP instructors. And NFP instructors, when I'm teaching a couple, I am very like, these are the rules to avoid pregnancy. And I'm very, I explain those very strictly. And because my job is to make sure they understand how to avoid pregnancy naturally using, fertility awareness and the body signs that they have. But honestly, I'm not really sure that needs to be the default for married Catholic couples. I just just from a personal opinion standpoint.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it is something that it's interesting because we sort of like, I think our mindset is sort of cooperative with the culture because it's hard to kind of go against it, right? So our mindset is like, oh, okay, I don't have to use birth control. In fact, I can't use birth control, but I can do this instead, right? And so it seems like our default is always to be in that place of control, right? That like, oh, I can manage this. I can do this. I can do it naturally. I can do it within church teaching. I can do all this stuff. But ultimately, it's still that default to try and control. And there is not anything wrong with that under the right circumstances, right? But I think that you're right. The point that it gets difficult is when it's like, okay, maybe I'm suddenly not within those circumstances anymore where I have to control anymore, right? Like it is fine to do that if you are postpartum and overwhelmed, if you have so many other kids and a lot going on in life and you feel like you can't take on anything else right now. It is fine if your mental health is suffering. It is fine if your physical health is suffering. Like it is fine if your financial stability is. There are so many reasons that it is fine to do that. But what if all of those things are not suffering? Like what if all of those things are good and you're just, and I say you because, but really talking to me because I am in this state right now, right? Where it's like, my youngest is almost 2 years old, which is insane. She still feels like a baby to me, but she's still not sleeping.
I could not believe it when you said
right?
that.
Like
I was like, she's 2.
I know. She's gonna be 2 next month. It's insanity. I was like recording this podcast while I was like pregnant with her, and I was like, that was over 2 years ago now. Anyway, but yeah, so I'm finding myself in this space where it's like, oh my gosh, the baby's almost 2. She's sleeping better, not awesome, but she's better, right? Like we're in a really good place just with all of those things financially, like with the other kids are even asking for another baby. Some of them, you know what I mean? It's just like, wow, like maybe we're in a place where we don't have to avoid anymore. And I think it feels strange to make that transition because again, the default is to control. That's just human nature, right? Like for so much of us. I mean, I'm a control freak, right? Like so many people struggle, especially when you're talking about something as weighty, literally weighty as like pregnancy, right? Like it is a toll. It's a toll on the body. It's a toll on the mind sometimes. Like it's a toll on everything that it's like, oh yeah, we gotta be really careful around this really heavy thing. But then sometimes you just don't. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you can. And it might not mean like and again, I'm using myself as an example here because this is exactly where I am. Do I want like so badly to be pregnant right now? Really? Like I've done it 5 times already. It's like, it's kind of the apple sort of lost its luster a little bit, but like, do I also not want to have another baby? Like, I don't know. Maybe not. Like, I think I'm in a place where it's strange because it's one of the first times I've really been here where it's like, I would be fine having another baby, but I would also be fine if we didn't. And, like, it's sort of this place where you really can just like lean in to God and just beg for his will, and that's it. Like all I want right now, Lord, is what you want. But the funny thing is this is how we should be all the time.
Yes.
Right?
That's what I was going to just say.
Yeah. Like I think it's a gift to find yourself in that emotional and spiritual and physical space where you feel at peace with either option. That is a gift. And I think that honestly, in 11 years of marriage and 5 babies, it's the first time I've been in that space. So I thank God for it. Like I praise him for it. But it's just this eye-opening revelation too, that like, wow, what if I could have been, like, what if I was in this space all the time? Like, what if I was always here? Like where it's just like, yeah, Lord, whatever you want, and I will be at peace.
It's truly, you look at writings of the saints, any of them, right? And it's just like, right, your will be done, Lord. Like, who is it that says like, I should equally celebrate? It might be Ignatius. Like I should equally celebrate like good news and bad news because I know it's God's will. Like I should celebrate everything that happens to me because if it's happening to me, it's God's will. Like he doesn't allow things to happen that are not within his will. And
permissive will maybe.
Right? Yeah, right. Like he'll allow things to happen that he knows that he can bless, that he will bless, right? He allows things that are hard and sad and frustrating. And like he allows those things to happen because he knows that he can create a greater good out of it. He's never going to allow something that he can't create a greater good out of. He never is going to allow that. And like, that's just somewhere that I think just as a culture, we just don't have, because our culture is not a culture of Christendom anymore. Like there's just no concept of a higher power that truly is taking care of everything, right? Yeah. And so it's like our culture is black and white. It is, are you trying to get pregnant or are you not trying to get pregnant? Those are the two options, right? Your OBGYN is asking you, what's your method of birth control unless you're trying to get pregnant? And it's like, well, but I'm not. Like, I don't know. Like, I love Jennifer Fulwiler in, like, I think it was like her last baby or something like that. It's in one of her books. But like her OB is like, oh, was this planned? And she's like, I don't know how to answer that question.
It was like, not planned, but expected.
Yeah, like, it's like we more or less knew what we were doing, but I guess we maybe didn't necessarily want to get pregnant, but also like God's in charge, so like he knew, I just love that part of her book.
That is
I don't remember which book it is. Just read all of her books. They're hilarious and fun to read.
They're good, they're fun. They are
but
fun.
It's just like it's so true, and we don't remind ourselves of that enough. That God he truly will not let something happen to you that he can't create a greater good out of. He just won't.
Really quick, before we get on with the rest of the episode, I just wanted to ask you that if this podcast has blessed you in any way, or you've learned something from this podcast, would you please rate and review this podcast The reviews in particular really help people find this podcast and benefit from it. So I would be so grateful if you would rate and review the podcast.
I think, Ellen, when we were preparing for this episode, I think you put it really well, where you said, how do I know? Like one of the questions we wanted to answer was, how do I know when it's time to stop avoiding, right? To intentionally stop avoiding. And it's so funny because again, everything just seems like black and white for us. There's a time to be born and a time to die, right? There's a time to avoid and then a time to not. But I think that oftentimes, because this is such a thing that we try to control and it feels like such a big black and white thing a lot of the time, we lose the nuance of that, right? Where it's I don't know, we don't have to just go from this, or it's like we're looking for a sign. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Oftentimes it feels like we want a sign. Lord, how do I know when it's time? And it's just well, you don't have to know, right? It can just be just look at the checklist, right? Are any of these things really suffering where you have a serious reason to not get pregnant? And honestly, if you're asking the question, you're probably good to just kind of let loose on the rules a little bit. You know what I mean? If there's not an obvious
creep into your thought pattern, okay,
exactly.
Well,
it's so funny. Michael and I always joke about how it's man, as soon as we start thinking it's time to have, maybe we could start trying to have another baby, we're usually already pregnant. Which is not the case right now. I can tell you right now because I am on my period. But yeah, it's always kind of funny. It's just oh man, we'll start talking about it, and it's oh wait, we already clearly did that. So
right. Well, I think what happens when we ask that question is we're kind of focusing on the wrong question here, right? When is it time to stop trying to avoid? When will I know that it's time to stop trying to avoid? I'm not sure that that's a question we ever really need to be asking ourselves. Ultimately, the question we need to be asking ourselves on the Christian journey is, what's your will, God?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. What's your will? I think another question that gets asked that is 100% the wrong question, because I always know the answer to it. I get this in DMs every once in a while. And I'm I know the answer to this question. The question is, does God want me to have a baby right now? The answer is, oh my gosh, always yes to that question. The answer is always yes to the question, does God want me to have a baby right now? Yes, he does. Because our God is the God of life. He is the creator. He created life. He breathed life into this earth. He loves life. He always wants life. He always wants life. So if you ever ask yourself that question, you know the answer immediately. Does God want me to have a baby right now? Yes, he does. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even if you are in the most dire of circumstances of needing to avoid pregnancy, yes, God's want would be for you to have a baby, because life is so good and so precious and so holy. Another eternal soul partying it up in heaven? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
So stop asking that question, because we know the answer.
Yeah.
But I think what we need to focus more on is just, where is God calling me to practice virtue right now?
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're doing when we're practicing virtue is we're practicing life in heaven. Life in heaven, we're going to perfectly live out all of the virtues. Yeah. And so here on earth, we say practicing virtue because we're practicing what heaven's going to be like. And so is God calling you to practice virtue right now in welcoming another life and putting that toll on your body again, and, and just saying, okay, God, it is on you. And like, let's do this. Is God calling you to practice virtue in abstaining from each other? Right? Is the, oh, well, let's just throw the chart out the window more of a selfish thing because you don't want to have to abstain? That's a really important question to ask. Again, God always wants a baby. He always does.
Yeah.
But, I think when we bring that to prayer, when we're trying to figure out, okay, is it time for me to stop trying to avoid pregnancy? It's more about what virtue is God calling me and my spouse to practice right now? And you can even ask God, like, how is this like bringing us to holiness? Like what's your path right now? What do you want to teach us right now through this stage of our life, right? Are you teaching us prudence and patience and just the virtue of just, kind of holding back and just recognizing that we need to abstain? Are you teaching us more of a virtue of generosity and just openness and abandonment to your will? And God will reveal those things to you. I think we have an episode about like prayer and discernment and just talking about that, like using natural family planning requires actual like active prayer. Like you can't just use the tool of fertility awareness and be like, well, check, we're good to go. Like active prayer, that means like do a holy hour, go to adoration, bring this to mass intention, and like, don't just try to guess what God is saying. Like actually just open up your mind and let God tell you what he's going to tell you.
Yeah. You know what too? Like, I think that is like the key piece, right? To like really truly practicing NFP is discernment and prayer, like regular prayer combined with the practice of fertility awareness. And sometimes it can be like, oh my gosh, I don't sit and do a holy hour over like my family planning, or I don't sit and I don't remember to bring this to mass intention. Like sometimes those feel like really big things that we just often forget to do. But I will say that like one thing that I do with the kids every night when we say our prayers is we always say, Lord, help us to come to know, love, and serve you better tomorrow than we did today. And even in something like that wraps up that intention. You know what I mean? How can I know, love, and serve you better tomorrow than I did today? And I think that what that shows, just a small intention like that, is just an openness, right? Like an openness to know him better, to love him better, to serve him better, however that might be, right? So even just including a line, whether it's specific to fertility awareness and like family planning, or if it's just like an openness to like following him in any way he asks you, right? Just including that one short, like we call them arrow prayers, right? Just right up to God into your daily routine, I think is sufficient for this intention, just coming up. I mean, and definitely like when you're really in this space where you're just like, oh my gosh, what do? I feel like I'm in this new place. Well, then bring that to a holy hour, 100%. But just as you're going on your everyday life, like you can include this in your daily prayer just with a short little sentence. And don't like ever forget the power of just those like regular habitual short, intentions and prayers.
Is also that, we're called to just continue to grow on this journey. So, if you heard me say that and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't bring this to mass, I don't do a holy hour, then plan to do that. Even if you're in kind of a solid situation where you're like, I'm pretty sure like we're kind of set in the area we're in for a while. Like we're going to be trying to avoid for a while or whatever. Like plan to do that. Take more steps, right? Like continue to grow in your relationship with God, in your prayer life. And, like, don't just say like, oh, I've got enough prayer done. Like, no.
Yeah.
Right. And like, so those arrow prayers are a great starting point, and you can continue to grow from there. and just, and don't like beat yourself up about it. Oh my gosh, I don't do this. I don't do that. I'm not as holy as Ellen and Kathleen. Psst,
you're holier.
You're holier.
Don't worry.
You're good to go.
100%.
But like, take a new step tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Take another step today. Be a little bit holier tomorrow. Grow a little bit more in relationship with God. Grow a little bit more in prayer with God. Mm-hmm. I think to kind of like wrap this episode up, really what we're looking for on the Christian journey, and I think a lot of times this element of trying to avoid pregnancy can be like a very obvious aspect of our relationship with God, is like our goal is to align our will with His. Mm-hmm. Our goal in the Christian journey is not to be in control, is not to be in charge, is not to know what's going to happen. None of those things are what we're called to do.
Yeah.
Like what we're called to do is follow God's will. And His will might look really different than we think it should. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a really good thing, because God knows what He's doing and we don't. We just don't.
We really don't.
And so an unplanned pregnancy might seem like the worst thing to happen, but ultimately it's going to be the best thing to happen, because God only allows things to happen to you that He can bless 100-fold.
Yeah. I'll say, so I am like super blessed to have a really awesome Catholic OBGYN that I go to. And I remember being in this place one time where it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, it was like the struggle postpartum of just like avoiding and the whole thing. And she told me, she was like, listen, you need to remember that you can provide an egg and your husband can provide a sperm, but only God can make a baby. And I go back to that so often, where it's like, God is, I mean, all we have to do, our only job is to show openness, right? Is to like remain open for whatever God wants from us, right? And so maybe sometimes that means we throw the rules out the window and we, enter into sex and, and God doesn't, like during a fertile time, and God doesn't bring a baby out of it. Like that can happen. Like we know the biology, like we know how babies are made, right? But we forget that it's not just biology. There's a human soul that needs to be given through the biology, right? And maybe God won't do it at times. I mean, ask anyone who's experienced secondary infertility, right? Like, it doesn't always have to happen that way, but we show the openness, and God will show us His will through that openness. If we're constantly closed off, He can't bring about His will. But if we're open, He can. And maybe that'll be a baby, but also maybe it won't for a time, And just that we can always lean into that trust. Like it doesn't mean that every single time we have sex during our fertile period, we are absolutely going to make a baby. Like that's not up to us. That's ultimately up to God. We know the likelihood. We know the science. But ultimately we forget that there is a spiritual component that's required for this to happen. So that openness can be a really beautiful thing if you aren't in that place where you absolutely have serious reason to avoid.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.